Good morning, and welcome to the 31st Russell B. Clark Gerontology Conference. We're really happy to see you here. I'm Ray Merrill. I'm the director of the BYU Gerontology program. I'm a professor here at Brigham Young University in health science in the College of Life Sciences. And with me, the legendary Bill Rogers and Ian Hunter and Jared Ward. And so they'll be on our speaking today, and we'll have a panel discussion after their presentations. Our opening prayer today will be by Ethan Chan. He's an exercise science major and a gerontology minor student here at BYU. So thank you. So this morning, when it was still dark, I met with Ian Hunter and Bill Rogers, and we went on a 4-mile run. And it's just really exciting to think that Bill Rogers can say that he ran with the legendary Ray Merrill. Oh, did I say that?
No, that was right.
Okay. But yeah, Bill Rogers has been really a hero of mine since high school. And we're just really fortunate to have him here. I discovered that I'm a kindred spirit with him. We both have seasonal allergies, and we were both wondering, how can we be suffering from allergies before anything's blooming? And we don't get it. But every spring, I seem to get allergies before anything's in bloom. So Ian Hunter, he competed for Brigham Young University as an 800-meter runner from 1989 to 1996. After university, he completed graduate school, earning a PhD in exercise science here at Brigham Young University. He's now a professor at Brigham Young University, specializing in mechanics and running performance. His work is widely known, and when I picked up Bill Rogers from the airport, he was talking about Ian and wanting to learn. I mean, he knows of your work, and he wanted to learn from you today. He was really looking forward to this presentation. So we look forward to hearing from you. After Ian, Jared Ward is going to speak to us. He's a 6-time All-American runner at BYU, 3-time USA national champion, placed 6th in the 2016 Rio Olympics, and was ranked the top marathon runner in the U.S. in 2019. He is from Mapleton, Utah, and is married, or he married his sweetheart, Erica Christensen, who is also a runner, and together they have 5 children. Jared graduated from Brigham Young University in statistics, and now as an adjunct statistics faculty member, is currently doing research in biomechanics and pacing strategy for marathon performance. And I know that he and Ian do a lot of collaborative work together. And after Jared's presentation, we'll hear from Bill Rogers. Bill Rogers, his resume, his bio is really long. Born of goodly parents. Bill Rogers is an American runner and former American record holder in the marathon who is best known for victories in the Boston Marathon and the New York Marathon in the late 1970s. He won each of those 4 times. He was born in Hartford, Connecticut. Rogers won both races, let's see, your first Boston win was in 1975, is that right? Okay. He also, in 1977, he won the Fukuoka Marathon, making him the only runner ever to hold the championship of all 3 major marathons at the same time. He made the 1976 U.S. Olympic team and raced the marathon at the Montreal Olympics in 1976. He did not participate in the Olympics in 1980 due to the U.S. boycott, and a lot of us think that he was probably the favored runner to win that, and it was really sad not to see him go to the Olympics in Moscow. In 1975, he won the bronze medal in the IAAF World Cross Country Championships, equaling Tracy Smith's 1966 bronze in the International Cross Country Championships at the highest an American had ever finished in the international cross country competition. Roger's most remarkable year on the road racing circuit was in 1978 when he won 27 of the 30 races he entered, including the Pepsi 10,000 meter nationals, the Falmouth Road Race, and the Boston and New York marathons. Rogers is also the former world record holder for 25 kilometers as he broke Pika, I don't know how to pronounce this last name, his world record with a time of 1:14:11 on the track in Saratoga, California in 1979. Last night I mentioned that one of his greatest feats, in my opinion, is he did a 1-hour run, and in that 1-hour run he set 4 American records, which is pretty incredible at different distances en route to that finishing that 1-hour run. So we'll start with Ian, and then Jared, and then Bill.
Well, to start off, I'd like to just mention last night we had some a dinner with a few students up here, and specifically we heard from Brittany and Grant that are in the gerontology minor right now, and I was really impressed with what's going on in this program. So students that are in it right now, keep moving. You're doing good things. And those that may not be in the program, I'd encourage you to go to their advisement center and take a look and see if it's something that can work well for you. Now, to start off on my part in this, none of my info is showing here anymore, and I can't see the screen. All right, the question I want to focus on today is what happens as we age in terms of our running ability. Here's a collection of some of my favorite runners at various ages. The first one that you see is me enjoying running just as much or maybe even more than I do today. Quite a few years ago, I was 36 at the time, I had the following conversation with someone named Steve. Some of my faculty remember Dr. Aldana. We met outside as I was finishing a run, and Steve said, you know, it's amazing that you can still run as well as you do for how old you are. And I hadn't thought much about age at that point. And I just said, well, thanks. How's your running going? And he said, well, pretty good. I can still get out every day, but it's just harder and harder. I just can't recover like I used to. And so I asked, well, did that change all of a sudden, or was it just kind of gradual? And he said, it actually just happened right when I turned 40. As soon as I was 40, it just all went downhill. And being 36, I couldn't think of what to say. I just said, oh. And then I didn't know anything else I could say at the moment. So I just tried to pretend the conversation never happened. But that's kind of like, if some of you know this example, trying to get a good night's sleep, wondering if your alarm's going to go off as you get ready for your next marathon. You just don't sleep well the night before a race. So I couldn't remember the conversation, just like I struggle with sleep the night before a race. So not being able to forget the conversation, I turned to people like Haile Gebrselassie, one of the greatest runners of all time for distance running. He, in an interview when he was getting older, he just mentioned age is just a number. I thought, okay, yeah, it is just a number. So I'm just not going to pay attention to it. Faith Ensminger was a really successful Spartan race runner. At a very young age, she's beating many of the people quite a bit older than her. And I thought, well, you know, or in an interview after one of her races, she also said age is just a number. So whether you're young or old, okay, maybe it doesn't matter. I'll just pretend aging doesn't happen and keep trying to pretend I'm faster than I should be. And that attitude, I think, can be good, but it can also lead to injury if you start pushing beyond your abilities. Another one to think of, Meb Keflezighi. He's done some amazing things since winning his silver medal in the Olympic marathon in 2004. He often was counted out as being too old. And then one of those years when he was counted out as, well, maybe he'll get into the top 10, he ended up winning the Boston Marathon and also the New York Marathon. In 2014, Boston Marathon, he ran his personal best, 2:08:37, just days before turning 39. So as we age, here's the things that change in our bodies. We gradually get a decrease in maximum heart rate. Endurance-trained runners start with a lower maximum heart rate anyway, which might seem a little odd if you'd think, well, if you can train hard, your heart should be able to go really quickly. But endurance-trained runners, even at young ages, are able to pump more blood with each stroke. So what we call cardiac output can be really high, even with the lower rate. So they start with a lower maximum heart rate and have a more gradual decline of maximum heart rate as they go through age. So we do get a lower maximum heart rate, some of our maximum capacities decrease, but with the training, we're able to slow that decline. Funny story about heart rate in runners. Paul Pilkington. Is he from Ogden? Do you know, Jared? I don't know if he grew up there. Spent a lot of time there since. He got hired by the LA Marathon in 1994 to be a pacer. Go through 15 miles, collect your $3,000 if you hit the pace that they said to. He got to that point, and everyone in the race decided, I don't want to go that pace. So he found himself out there all alone and thought, well, I feel good, might as well keep going. So he collected his $3,000 for doing the right pace through 15 miles and ended up winning that day. So he was at the time just making a modest salary as a teacher. He was, along with the $3,000 for pacing, he also collected the prize money for the event and a luxury car. And in his interview, he just said, well, I'm hoping we can replace the old family van that has 100,000 miles on it. But that's who Paul Pilkington was. Now he's a coach, very successful up at Weber State. And he was out on a run one day and felt lightheaded, didn't feel good, passed out at a stoplight, got up, made his way home, told his wife what had happened. She said, let's get you to the hospital. So he's there in the hospital, they're monitoring him, everything seems fine, probably just dehydrated, but they wanted to keep him overnight to be careful. And late in the night, the nurse comes in, wakes him up, and says, hey, are you okay? Yeah, I finally got to sleep. What's going on? And she said, well, the heart rate monitor went off. It said your pulse got below 20. And that worries us. Is that normal for you? And he said, well, I don't normally check it when I'm asleep. I don't know. But he's one that had a very low maximum heart rate and resting heart rate, obviously. Muscle mass also decreases with age. However, with endurance training, muscle mass is lower and the amount of fat that fat increase is diminished. So this is just one example from a study I observed on muscle mass with age. And you can see comparing I forgot the number, is it a 40-year-old to 70-something-year-old triathlete? Visually, you don't see much difference in the composition of the muscle. So we stay healthy and active, we can diminish some of those changes that would be going on with muscle mass and fat gain. Type 2 muscle fibers, you may have heard them as fast twitch. They produce greater forces at a faster rate, but they fatigue relatively quickly. That's one of the typical differences between sprinters and distance runners. The image I enjoy here, Frank Fredericks, he's one of our BYU grads that has 4 silver medals from the Olympic Games. Twice he went under the world record a few hundredths before someone else did it. You'd think you run that quick, you'd have a gold, but we blame it on Michael Johnson, who was ahead that day. Many people notice decreases in top speed more than distance performance as they age, partly due to this loss of fast twitch fibers, or at least a reproportioning. The graph here just shows what we typically expect to see for percentages. You can see that there are very dramatic differences. Coach Eystone, I think he told me that he got tested and was 95% of what we call these slow twitch fibers, two-time Olympian in the marathon, and mostly slow twitch. Frank was around 95% fast twitch, which is part of his success. But these proportions gradually change as we go through age. Bone density, another one to be concerned about. This gradually decreases with age beyond about 25 years old. This can increase risk for stress fractures, among other issues. This is a typical trend of what we expect to see with age. You can see the age and then the peak around age 25 and that gradual decline. So that puts us at some risk if we're trying to put large loads on our bones. There's some research came out of Oregon State University that took young children in elementary school, had them do 100 drop landings a day, 2-foot box that they'd drop off of. There was that group and then a stretching group that did the same amount of time. And they found increases of around 8 to 10% in bone density in those children. They followed them for 8 years and found the treatment group that did the drop landings maintained much of the benefit that they got from 8 years prior doing these extra impacts on their bodies. So we can do some things to change bone density. Dr. Snow, that did this research, also tested postmenopausal women and found similar increases by doing drop landings, but when they took the stimulus away, it went right back to where they would have been. So if you did a lot of jumping when you were under age 25, you're better off maybe for life. If not, whatever you can do to build bone needs to be maintained to keep those benefits in place. Does that say neuromuscular or something? Or no, stability. Yeah, I added the slide this morning and didn't put any notes, but wanted to just mention stability also. We have some neuromuscular changes related to the central nervous system and peripheral nervous system that lead to some inabilities to have the balance and stability that we did at a younger age. So these things don't look encouraging to us, but I'm going to share some thoughts of what we can do to diminish those changes and extend the career we might have of successful running, or just running for enjoyment. Extend the time that we can do it well. This is a picture of Fauja Singh. He finished the Toronto Marathon in 2011, 101 years old. As he came around the final corner, he told his coach, "Achieving this will be like getting married again." I don't know what to read into that comment, but I hope his marriage endures at least as well as his running ability. Somehow he's been able to diminish some of those effects of age related to running. And we know taking care of our bodies through consistent training, good nutrition, good sleep, and so on will slow the decline and extend our level of racing. However, the decline is inevitable. So we need to get our mind in the right place to continue the motivation, even if our race times grow with our age. Many people find ways to keep the enjoyment going. Here's some masters runners. The one I want to focus on is Julia Hurricane Hawkins. She's the one on the right of your image. She recently set the world best for the 105-year-old age group in the 100-meter dash. She ran 62 seconds. After the race, she said, "It's wonderful to see so many family members and friends, but I wanted to do it in less than a minute." And you can read a lot into that. You know, the motivations seem to be coming from family and friends, and also some time goals. You know, whether 62 seconds, it sounds like, oh, well, I'm 70 and I could do that. I'm 50 now, I could do it still at 50, but I have no clue what it means to be 105. And she's the best that's ever done it. So motivation of being under 60 seconds was her goal. Now, we can find some motivations, but you look at this graph and things don't look encouraging. Here's a couple of positive takes from it, though. First, it does not look like until somewhere maybe in the 50s where a more dramatic increase in race times occurs. Second, though, there's a big spread. Notice at the earlier ages, there's not much difference in this collection of times. But as we get later in life, the variance around that. If you don't understand that term, ask Jared. He's my stats guy. But the variance seems to grow as we get older, meaning there are some people that find ways to really maintain a lot of what they had, while others struggle to do that. So if we can figure out the key to keeping our bodies as strong as they can be and diminishing the declines, we'll be able to find greater motivations. There are some running mechanics that change subtly with age. This is more my focus of what I look at in my own research. The graphs might make no sense to you, and that's fine. These are focused on what we call joint moments. Basically, how much we can use our, I'm just thinking of the way I mentioned it in class as we're talking physics. Basically how strong we are, to simplify it a bit there. There are some subtle changes that go on, but they're not very dramatic. Most of the changes in how the people move and apply force to the ground comes from they're running slower, not the mechanics of running are changing. So we don't need to worry too much about how am I moving compared to before. Most of us just hope to keep some of the speeds up where they used to be. Now, all of these changes can be diminished through consistent training. While the changes are inevitable, they can be slowed, allowing for greater motivation. There may be times when injuries come, cross-training is required, or motivations may decrease. As we find ways to endure through these trials and keep our bodies and minds healthy, then the rewards do end up paying off greatly. Here are the best methods that can diminish these age-related changes that limit our running capacity. First, resistance training. That should be included, all through a running career if you really want to optimize your performance. But it becomes increasingly important as we age for maintaining more of those type 2 fibers that are more powerful and helping with some of those neuromuscular fatigue things that affect our stability and balance and so on. Interval training is a great way to get a stimulus that just regular running will not do. And that has all kinds of benefits in terms of maintaining performance abilities or even increasing them. Racing is a very good way to load your body and have it primed for preventing these declines with age. And then in my notes here, I just wrote eat your veggies, but that's the thing that usually lacks. I would include get your red meat in, get the iron and protein, but what usually lacks in the US is we don't eat enough vegetables. The other things aren't as hard to come by. Once the resistance training, interval training, racing, and nutrition and everything is in place, we need to take time to recover. There are age-related changes that lead to slowed recovery. This does not necessarily mean more days between workouts, though. I had a brief discussion with Bill about this last night. We don't necessarily have to start skipping days of running if that's not what we want to do. We can just modify the training, either through the amount of miles, the intensity, the surfaces we're on. Getting on a softer surface will take some of the load off the body. Cross-training, all of those methods provide smaller and or lower stresses, on the tissues while they're able to heal. So you can still run on a day when you're recovering from what you did the day before. All right, I want us to take a look at a race here real quick. Flip over. The focus. This is 1 lap to go in a 5K, 12.5 lap race. And I want you to focus on the one with the bright green uniform, Bernard Lagat. I wish you could hear the sound. I hear it quietly in the computer, the announcer's going, but they're getting excited about all the runners there, focusing on Ryan Hill and some others that are moving up, maybe getting into position. But Lagat, the one I want you to focus on, he's 39 years old at the time of this race. Are they at 100 to go yet? Okay, so Lagat's making his move, and you can see he has something that the other runners do not have. This amazing finish, but focusing not so much on his running ability, I want you to take a look at what goes on after the race is over. His focus doesn't seem to be on getting the best he can out of himself. While that's important to him, he's looking to build other people up. He'd been running maybe his whole life, but he was very successful at Washington State University and in the Olympics for Kenya at, age 19 or something? Continuing, and he's even done a great marathon now at this point. So we've got some, did that go away? And are the slides back? Okay. He's continued running at this incredibly high level for years, and his motivations to do it seem to be different from some other people I've observed over the years, that looking to build himself up, but also strengthening those around him has been part of, I think, what's made his career so long. He has officially retired from professional racing now. He's coaching at University of Arizona. All right, so as we mature physically, we also mature emotionally and gain a better perspective on our interactions with others and within ourselves. A few weeks ago, I put a question on social media. These are the reasons I got back of why do you run? Notice none of the reasons up there are about beating somebody else. Also, if we look at these and realize a runner with any natural or trained ability can fit in with any of these reasons. They're all good reasons to be out there. And if we can keep that kind of focus instead of all that matters is what time I get in a certain race, then our motivations can stay up there. A few weeks ago, I saw a tweet from Sarah Hole, American record holder in the half marathon. She's now 39 years old and set that record just a few weeks ago. She expressed how she does not want to see herself as an age group runner. She's just out there to compete and see what she can do with her body. I like that attitude, but as I mentioned, we do have these changes that are going to catch up with us at some point, and we just can try to slow them to keep that motivation going. I focused on Meb Keflezighi, Bernard Lagat, Sarah Hole, and the success they all had when they were 39. That kind of backs up Steve's statement of it all went downhill at 40. But in 2020, Abdi Abdurrahman became the oldest qualifier for the Olympic marathon, representing the US in Tokyo at age 44. So there's no magical age where all of a sudden our abilities are just gone. There are many factors out of our control and many factors in our control related to how our bodies will handle aging. And that leads to a variation of outcomes that we need to expect, and we need to figure out our own path and what will work well for us. So when we obtain the right reasons to run, it will not matter very much how old we are, what the outcome of each training cycle is, what injuries or setbacks we had in the past, any of those things. What is going to matter is the moments in nature, the feelings of exhilaration in racing and training, the lessons learned, and I think most importantly, the relationships we made along the way. That's what's going to provide the motivation for us to continue on in whatever way our bodies will allow us as we grow older. All right. I will pass the time over to Jared. As both Jared and Bill finish, we'll have some time for questions on any of the discussions that we talk about here.
Well, you guys are a friendly-looking lot. Thanks for coming out. I see a number of faces out here that I recognize, and it's fun to see you all. And thanks, Ian, or Dr. Hunter. I call Ian Doc, and so if you hear Doc, I mean Ian. And it's so fun for me to get to present alongside Doc and alongside Bill Rogers, two idols of mine. And I've been blessed to learn from both of them. Ian mentioned how we do research together. Doc is kind enough to let me do statistics at the end of his research and carry me along with him. And so I've been riding on his coattails for a while. And I've loved getting to know Bill Rogers over the years. You know, you get to hear from him today, and such a fun personality and a storied career. And I love his book. It's fun to read and hear after you get to know Bill Rogers a little bit, to read his book and to feel Bill Rogers come out of the book, his personality, and so that's a very fun read to those storied years in Boston and New York City Marathon history. But I'm excited to talk a little bit today about some old research of mine and old research of others, but stuff that's still relative to using data to identify how we should be pacing. And some of that as we're aging, but some of that's just in general. So if you're here at this conference thinking, I'm young, so this doesn't apply to me, well, this might apply to you. So you're welcome. I want to talk a little bit first about the St. George Marathon and some research there. Doc helped me come across some cool St. George Marathon data that drove my master's thesis in statistics. We looked at some pacing profiles there, and then I want to look in a little bit into Jack Daniels' approach on VO2 max and VDOT training. And so that's where we're headed today. Okay, so this St. George Marathon data was driven, or the St. George Marathon analysis was driven by data from the 2013 St. George Marathon. What we were really interested in seeing is how we can profile how people are pacing the marathon. Do men and women pace differently? Do we pace differently as we age? Do people who hit Boston Marathon qualifying marks approach the race differently from a pacing standpoint than our other participants in the race? And here's what we had for our data. We had runners aging from age 8 to age 81. I don't know which is more impressive. And quite a profiling of gender and paces, and over 800 runners that hit a Boston Marathon qualifying mark. I don't work for the St. George Marathon, but for those looking to qualify for Boston, it seems to be a good one. And then this is the elevation profile, which will be important as we look at how people pace the marathon, because as you can see, not all sections of the St. George Marathon are created equal. There's some very steep downhill sections, and there's one steep uphill section. And so this is the St. George Marathon. Okay, this is do we have statisticians here? This is statistic mumbo jumbo that says we can do some cool things. Okay, this says we're modeling this as a multivariate normal distribution, and we used a sampling technique called Gibbs sampling to use a Bayesian approach to analyzing these data. And essentially that's a complicated way of saying we're looking at a few predictors, these X's: age, are you male or female, did you qualify for Boston or not, etc. And how well do those predict how we're pacing the race? Okay, so this is what our model is. And then how we pace the race, we're defining as splits for 4 splits through the race. So we had a split at 10K, 21K, 30K, and then the finish. So we can back out of that 4 sections of the race in how runners are pacing that. And our response variable here, so what we're predicting with age and did you qualify for Boston and gender and these things, is this 4-dimensional response of how are runners pacing the marathon. And we took each one of those paces, okay, so pace for your first 10K, and we divided it by your overall average pace. So if that number is greater than 1, it means you paced that split faster than your average for the race. A number less than 1 means you were slower for that split than you were across the race. So if we look at these, this response kind of summary here, look at the mean for a second, and we see 1.07 for pace 1, meaning on average, people start the St. George Marathon at a faster pace than they maintain throughout the race. Similarly, if we come over here to pace 4, the last 10K of the race or a little over, we have 0.95, meaning people are finishing slower than they started on average. Okay, so we clear here? Okay, it's nothing like statisticians to make things more complicated than they need to be. But it has some magic back in that magic formula there. Okay, so this is what we see for effect sizes for runners. So if you look at that top line, intercept, that's the average. So on average, people are running the first split fast, the second split slow, the third split fast, and then the fourth split slow. Does that make sense? Okay, the third split, if you remember that elevation profile, has a lot of downhill, so it's not particularly surprising that that's faster. But what's interesting is comparing these effect sizes for some of these other variables. All of these are significant, okay? So when we're talking p-values, statistical significant, very, very small, okay? P-value 0.000 for most of these, okay? We had a lot of data. So these were significant effects. Our males are running a little bit closer. Well, so I guess let's not talk about gender yet because that gets a little complicated. We have some squared terms in there and some interactions. Let's look at age, okay? That age variable seems to indicate that as we're aging in this first column, split 1, we are starting the race a little bit more conservative. And where that becomes interesting is if we compare that to the Boston. Boston there means those runners that hit a Boston qualifying mark. That's a big number in terms of how much slower the Boston Marathon qualifiers are starting. Okay, this is an additive model, so you can essentially take that 1.0794 for split 1, and you can add that Boston Marathon qualifying indicator to that, and that says that Boston Marathon qualifiers are still starting the race faster. You know, it's on average 1.02 than they finish the race, but much less significantly faster than the more average runners. And so I find it interesting to compare what's happening to these other effects to those runners that are qualifying for Boston. And we see that as we age, we get a little bit better at pacing profiles that more closely match what our faster runners are doing. And so to me, an interesting takeaway from this research was maybe age isn't necessarily a bad thing when we're looking at how people are pacing the marathon. Now, Ian talked about some physiological limitations of age, all sorts of things that are changing as we get older that limit our potential in terms of marathon performance, but maybe as we get older, we get smarter. Okay, so we can offset some of the limitations of age by racing more like those people that are running a little bit faster. Now, down at the bottom, there's an age squared term. Okay, and so I'm going to caution Bill Rogers. What this says is that in the model, as we age, we get better at pacing. If better is more closely looking like it looks for Boston Marathon qualifiers until a certain point. And once we get older, and we see it in 60s, 70s, 80s especially, we begin to revert back to starting faster than we can maintain. Okay, we don't want to let it go. Remember, the gun goes off, and Bill Rogers knows 5-minute pace, so he goes 5-minute pace. right? And so we got to be careful of that as we get older. And these results kind of illustrate that just a little bit in terms of what we're looking at in terms of splits across the race. So we converge to a more conservative start into our 30s and 40s and 50s, and then into our 60s and 70s, 80s, we get a little ambitious again. And so maybe a part of aging is getting smarter and being realistic in our approach to how we're approaching these races. I find it interesting, and this is a bit of a tangent, but this is a correlation matrix. So when we run these analysis, it predicts for us our correlation matrix for these response variables, and we can see how correlated the paces are split to split through the marathon. So split 1 and to split 1 is 100% correlated. Okay, it is split 1. But it's interesting to me that split 1 is far more correlated to split 4 than it is correlated to split 2 or split 3. Meaning how we start the marathon, that first 10K, is more predictive of how we're going to finish the marathon than the middle 2 splits of the marathon. So normally in these correlation matrices, when we're looking at data, and particularly autocorrelated data, right? Split 1 feeds into split 2, which feeds into split 3, and so on, we see correlation drift away, where the further we are away from autocorrelated data, the less correlated it is. And what we saw here was actually split 1 and split 4 were very correlated. Another, I guess, interesting corollary was that the elite runners, or the Boston Marathon qualifier runners, ran split 3 a lot faster, and that's the split that had a lot of downhill. So it seemed like the faster runners did a better job at taking advantage of terrain and running faster when the course allowed you to run faster. Maybe part of that was because they started a little bit more conservative, so they had a little more in their legs for that 20, 30K portion to take advantage of that terrain. But it's interesting to see that split 1 to split 3 had some more significant correlation than split 1 to split 2. Okay, so how you started the race also dictated how much you were able to take advantage of that downhill portion. So interesting to me, at least, to look at some of these correlations. Okay, I want to transition a little bit. This is Coach Ed Eyestone. He's my coach in college and still my current coach. And Coach Eyestone, there's a few coaching philosophies for endurance training. Okay, and I found it interesting that really endurance training for marathon running has somewhat deferred to a handful of experts in the field. Jack Daniels is one of them. Arthur Lydiard is another. There's a few of these coaches that have been significant key coaches in terms of developing theories, and some of these theories backed by science on how the best way to train endurance athletes are. And then really, we just sort of all do what these few coaches have said. Okay, none of us are willing to experiment too significantly with our training, because if it goes too drastically the wrong way, then I don't have a sponsor and I stop running. So we try to stay a little bit close to home. And Coach Eyestone follows this Jack Daniels approach. And I found it interesting. You know, I remember one of my good friends that went through this program. His name was Rory Linkletter, and he said, "Hey, Coach, shouldn't we be doing a little bit more VO2 testing? Shouldn't we get into Doc's lab and hook up the machine to our face and learn about our oxygen uptake?" And Coach Eyestone kind of shrugged, and he said, "Why?" And Rory said, "Well, I don't know, because VO2 matters, and it affects, you know, what our potential is, and we want to increase VO2 max and things like this." And Coach Eyestone said something that was profound to me. He said, "Rory, I don't care what your VO2 max is. I care what your velocity at VO2 max is." And I already know that. from your races and from interval training. And essentially what Coach Eystone was saying is, I don't care how good your body is at taking oxygen out of the air and utilizing it as a source of energy. I care about what that translates to in terms of times run on the track. So whether your VO2 is 70 or 90 doesn't matter if you can run 4 minutes for the mile. And I thought that was interesting. And I think that that's a little piece of what Jack Daniels was getting at. And Coach Eystone very much buys into the Jack Daniels training philosophy, but I think that's what Jack Daniels was getting at when he did his research. He essentially, back in the 70s, he took a lot of elite mid-distance and distance runners, and he measured their VO2 max and their lactate threshold and all sorts of stuff on the treadmill, and he created these tables that were based on less on actually what the athlete's VO2 max was per se, and what their effective VO2 max was. And Jack Daniels said, okay, at say a VO2 max of 80, maybe an athlete has it at 80, maybe his VO2 max is higher or lower than that. But if you can run a 2:08 marathon, then your effective VO2 max is 80, okay? This is kind of tying in that velocity at VO2 max. And I find this an interesting way to learn and help us educate and identify potentially what the right pace is when we're approaching a marathon, okay? I run 2 marathons a year, so it's not like I get to run a few marathons getting ready for a marathon to correctly identify the pace that I should go out at. When you're a miler, okay, you run a handful of miles a year, and so when you get to the national championships or your big end of season races, you sort of know what pace to go for because you've been able to experiment. What happens when I go out fast? What happens when I go out slow? Well, marathon training, it's a new cycle every time. My body's 6 months older than it was when I did the last one. Things have changed, and identifying the proper marathon pace becomes a bit of an art, but this is a way to incorporate a little bit of science. So what Jack Daniels did is he created these massive tables. Now, I don't expect you to be able to see these, but they say, okay, your V dot is this number, and so you ought to be able to run a 1,500 at this, and a 5K at this, and a 10K at this, and a half marathon at this, and a marathon at this. And I took out a few of them, okay? And this includes a V dot for. So Bill Rogers and I share marathon PRs. Okay, I guess I don't want to say I cheated because I didn't. But my shoes are faster than Bill's were, and so it's not really a fair comparison. But we both ran 2:09 for the marathon, and so an effective V dot per Jack Daniels table would put us at about a 79, and so that's 2:09:02. That's a few seconds faster than he or I have run for marathon. But it's interesting to me that my half marathon PR is 1:01:36, I think. So somewhat similar. My 10K PR is 28:36 on the track, but I think I ran about 28:15 on the road. And that was years ago, and so I think that's probably about accurate for my 10K. Now, these comparison tables don't carry as much weight the further you get from the event that you're trained for, okay? So there's more than just VO2 max that indicates how good of a miler you are and indicates how good of a marathon runner you are. There's a lot of other systems, okay? My systems are conducive to the marathon more so than the mile. So I could never run a 3:54 mile, but it feels kind of good to feel like my marathon time validates that I'm a sub-4 miler. So the further away you get from your event, the less effective these tables are at doing any type of predictability. But this table informs my marathon pacing decisions, both in training. Now Jack Daniels has training philosophies that correspond with these maximal effort racing comparables, but these comparisons and identifying paces through training for 5K, 10K, and half marathon, as well as tune-up races. I'm running a half marathon this weekend in New York as a tune-up race for the Boston Marathon that's next month. And this half marathon will give me an indicator at where I sit in terms of marathon potential because of tables like this. And so you can use a VDOT table or some of these training philosophies to indicate if you have a 5K or a 10K or a half marathon tune-up race, maybe what pace you should be targeting in your marathon pace, at least early on, to preserve the ability to take advantage of terrain and finish as fast or in some cases faster than you started. So in summary, we're all different, right? That's the beauty of life. That's the beauty of coaching. That's the art of figuring out our own bodies and learning what works for us. And what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for another person, and it becomes then an art. I think that dealing with marathon data as a master's student at BYU before I'd ever run my first marathon helped inform decisions both in training and racing and benefited my marathon performance and helped me excel quicker. The Olympic trials in 2016, when I made the Olympic team, was my 4th marathon, and I'm not sure that without the educated decision-making, data-driven approaches that I'd had before my first marathon to help guide my learning process, I'm not sure that I would have had the experience necessary to run well enough to make that Olympic team. I just snuck in. I was 3rd. But the more marathons you run, the more you become your own expert. Okay, I'm a statistician, but this is kind of like the Bayesian approach. Bayesian takes data, or some a priori assumption, old data, and it updates it with new data. Okay, the old data is what works on average. The new data is what works for me, and what do I respond well to. And the more new data you have, the less the old data matters. And I encourage you to experiment a little bit and learn what works for you, and accept and embrace the beauty that comes in what makes us all different. And then that maybe as we age, we get smarter. I certainly like to think this, and I certainly value my time with people that are wiser and smarter and more educated than me through experiences in life, and appreciate that, and certainly have been blessed by that. And I want to finish with a quote that I'm sure many of you have seen before from President Hinckley when he was on 60 Minutes with Mike Wallace a couple of decades ago. And near the end of their conversation, Mr. Wallace remarked, "There are those that say this is gerontocracy. This is a church run by old men." Okay, and President Hinckley, quick on his feet, said, "Isn't it wonderful to have a man at maturity at the head, a man of judgment who isn't blown away by every wind of doctrine?" And I think Mike Wallace responded by saying something like, "Well, sure, as long as they're not dotty," or something like that. And President Hinckley said, "I'll take that as a compliment." But I think it's wonderful to embrace what we can learn from each other and what we can learn from experience, and grateful to be here and able to rub shoulders with many of you, and excited to hear from Mr. Bill Rogers, and so I will turn the time over to him.
I hope you're having as much fun as I think I'm having fun, but sometimes I get a little nervous, And but I think we are in the brave new world of the science of exercise, which is absolutely great because we can all access that, and in this maybe the most accessible of all sports in a certain way. But I love listening to both Jared and to Ian because they both have, this unique methods, but also, running in some ways is very simple, but it's also a very, very competitive sport too. And you could see that in the tables, and in the way there is an Olympic Games in the world. It's this ancient thing from Greece. When they had the Olympiads way back 2,000 years ago or something. I don't know the exact years, but a sound mind and a sound body. I think there's a little of that, and so I think that's a little bit of what gerontology is about. And I've had a great time coming here, and I want to thank Ray, the manager of the program here, because I've learned a lot, but also to see so many students here that are really learning and gonna, really help me, because I'm the oldest one in our group. I need the help. Actually, I was thinking of my mom and dad. My mom became a runner when she was 57, and she lived to 97, but she was always active, you know, so it's really a, you know, my dad, he wasn't an athlete type. He was more a little bit like Ian and Jared in a way, that both active people too, but he was more a science person and everything. And but I come from I'm from like a different era. I'm like an artifact or something, you know, because I'm 74, and the world of distance running was very different than it is today, you know, with training and the knowledge of training. But I had really good coaches. My whole life I had a good coach in high school who was used to the interval training on the track, you know, and I was 15 years old and did the gym class mile, you know, and which President Kennedy talked about. Americans, let's try to be fit and everything, and that sort of idea, which is absolutely a no-brainer when you think of it, really. We should all think this way. I mean, why not, you know? So it's just you get more out of life. You live a better life, and of course I didn't think like that. I was 15 years old, you know, and I was running with my brother, Charlie, and best friend, Jason, and we grew up together when we were little kids, you know, and so you're just out running with your friends. It was that very low-key thing. But cross-country is hard. It definitely is a hard sport. And sometimes I would have a good day at it, and other days I would get crushed, you know. So you do have to accept being crushed if you're going to become a distance runner, a runner, any kind of runner. Don't you think, Jared and Ian? I think you do. And because then you can move forward from that, you know. And But we basically had fun in high school. We didn't really run very much. The high school runners of today and college runners of today are light years ahead of where we were, partly because the coaches are so much more knowledgeable. Coaches like Ed Eyestone, you know, who made the Olympic team twice, and he learned so much on his way. And from coaches, the coach, what's his name again? Jack Daniels. I didn't know, I never met Jack Daniels. I didn't know about him until years later. And then I heard that he had these tables, you know. So it's like you're living in your own little world. And sometimes you don't have access to that. Here you do have that access to it. And I think that's fantastic. I've never been to an event like this before where people talked about gerontology and what it means. And we're all going to get older if we're really lucky and that sort of thing. And sometimes things get tricky and it doesn't work out right, but I think we have to try. Trying is everything. That's what the marathon is, I think, and running is. It's just giving it a try. And but when I went to college, I was very lucky again, and I had a couple of teammates. Went to a small college. I'm from Hartford, Connecticut, which is not like Utah with its mountains and everything. It's the flatlands, the Connecticut River, you know, but these two roommates, one guy there, his name is Amby Burfoot, later became a writer for Runner's World magazine, big national magazine, and he was following a dream, you know, and he actually used to play, he had this record. We were roommates the year he won the Boston Marathon. He was only 21 years old. He was kind of a kid, you know, but he was a senior in college, but he had this dream. And this is part of running, I think, and part of the sports world and all of our lives, you know, no matter what our endeavors are. But Amby met a guy named Johnny Kelly in Groton, Connecticut, down by the ocean. And Johnny Kelly was a different kind of dude. He was a vegetarian way back in the 60s or 50s. He made the Olympic team twice, won the Boston Marathon, only runner from the Boston Athletic Association ever to win it, but he was a different dude. I don't quite know why, but so Amby learned a lot from him, and he wanted to win Boston. So I hung out with Amby. He took me on my first long run. I guess what I'm saying is we all help each other. This is really what it is, you know. So maybe everyone here is going to play that role, and that's a good thing because that's our sport, really, you know. And I remember Amby took me out once I was a sophomore when he was a senior. I did my first few road races when with Amby. He took me to a winter road race in Connecticut in a blizzard. I had my grandfather's leather sweater from football, you know, the old gray sweats. I froze to death. I didn't run another half marathon or another race like that for like, well, let me see, that was 68 that Amby won Boston. We ran that race in like February. And because the running gear was terrible. So in other words, the runners from yesteryear, there's a lot of reasons why athletes keep improving. It's exercise science, like Ian was a scientist talking about, and Jared as well, and the coaches of today who are so much more knowledgeable. And so we can all benefit from that. And but I love the look that it's not only for the younger people of the world, but that's important because in gerontology, of course, you may be working in a variety of capacities with older people. And I certainly learned that with my parents, you know, those people are like absolute key, you know, doing Zooms with my mom when she was 96, 97 years old and everything. And then COVID came and you could no longer visit. It was tough, very tough. But so the staff is totally, totally important, you know, and the doctors who are really doing the very, very best to help these old timers, I mean, real old timers, you know. And so it was very interesting. But you know, Amby helped me out a lot, and years later, but then when I couldn't run it with my team, with friends, I quit. And earlier today, down at your poster signing event, I met a woman there who was telling me a story about her son, who was a kid who started smoking when he was 12 and later got into drugs, big time. One of the terrible things we can ever do with our lives. And, you know, I remember being offered some drugs. I didn't know what the heck they were, but I was afraid of drugs. I'm a natural-born coward of anything. I don't want to climb these giant mountains like Ray has done. I'm afraid of heights, you know, and yeah, I can't do it. But I did become a smoker, you know, and I quit running, and boy, that's a dead-end street. If you ever, you know, later I knew people. I worked in a hospital about a year and a half, and learned so much there, seeing how powerful cigarettes are on you. You know, the only way I quit was I saw the Boston Marathon. I moved from Hartford to Boston when I worked in that hospital, and I saw, you know, people who were smokers, and they still wouldn't quit right to the end. You know, I was like, okay, what the heck is going on here? And then finally, I had a motorcycle in those days. I rode my motorcycle to work, and it was great fun. Borrowed $1,000 from my best friend Jason, my old high school teammate, to buy that used motorcycle. And then that got stolen. Now, it's either take the trolley in Boston. I hated waiting, so I start jogging again, you know, and joined the Boston YMCA. And that was key. I love the YMCAs because they give you a chance to be an athlete and get your health back. And so I did. And I remember watching Boston, and I saw Amby running there again. And some guys I ran against in college, like John Vitale from the University of Connecticut. And when you see someone you know, you just need one friend to get out the door, you know, no matter what your event is. And so I was really lucky with Amby Burfoot, and also with Jeff Galloway. And a lot of you know who he is. He created the Run Walk program. He's kind of like Jared, you know, a real thinker about the sport and how you can improve, and that we have this great genetic ability to recover from our running by walking. We have a huge heart for our body size. In the animal kingdom, we have this huge heart, you know, bigger than a lion's, proportionate to body size, I think. You know, I think I've read these things. I hope I'm correct. But they can outsprint us, though, so make sure you have a head start, you know. Give yourself about a half a mile or something. Actually went on kind of I went to Africa a few times, and I heard the lions roaring at night, and it was like, okay, this is really interesting. You know, I'm not leaving this little room. But overall, I would say I've had great fun in running, and because it changes your life. We all change so much, and I think that's what Ian and Jared are saying, you know, and Ray, what he wants to do with gerontology is open the door, because most people never never become active type person. They don't ride a bike or walk much, the car world and everything, and you get trapped. And next thing you know, you're never outside anymore. And then that, you go into decline. And it's one thing to go into decline now, yes, for me, I want to keep going, so I still like to go to some races. I can't race as much, but that's fine, because you accept it, but it's still fun. St. Patrick's Day this weekend, I'm doing a little 5K with my partner, Karen, in South Boston. Big Irish community, and she's Irish, English gal and everything, and she's a pretty good runner. She can beat me, which once or twice I got mad at her and I swore at her. She nailed me in a race so bad, and I was like, what are you doing? I couldn't, the male ego. It's real, so it was a tricky thing, but she's just, so it's your friends and your family, your partners, or everything. That's what I learned. But I had a disastrous start to my marathon. Unlike Jared, who was really, you had Ed Eyestone. I had good coaches too, but it was the old days where it was kind of cruder in the sport. And I didn't know what I was doing my first marathon, how to pace myself. Amby Burfoot told me at the start of my first Boston was 73. It was a hot day. No water on the course. Today there's water on all the courses. So that's the history of marathoning. Take a look at New York City Marathon. I ran that in 74. It was 4 laps of Central Park. Jared, you've run Central Park. You know how tricky that is, how hilly it is, hot and humid. So our sport was still, in 1974, the way it was in 1896. It was very backwards, very backwards. It was also backwards in regards to women's participation. It was mainly just us guys, and that took a while to change. But it did. It did. Now I think it's one of the ultimate sports in the world, in so many ways, and I think that's what you will find. If you're here and you're not a runner or you're not trying any sport, I hope, I don't know if you even like to use the word sport, activity, where you can seize the day, do your best, then I think your life changes, so much, and mine certainly has. And it's been fun to come here and to BYU. Of course, I knew about BYU, and to see the mountains and what it's like here, and how people are here. You have a really strong vision how you want to live, and that is the key, I think, to life, And so I got into it a little later, I think, by a rougher route. I dropped out of 8 marathons, and but some I really had fun. It was an honor to represent the United States, and go to another country. I remember going to China. I've raced on 5 continents, and with some of my friends, Gary Bjorklund, who Jared would know, and I wanted to win the Beijing International Marathon. This is 1983, when China was a smaller world than it is today, but all the runners of different countries were all there, and that's what I love, is the camaraderie of our sport, because then the boundaries fall, and I almost won that race. I was up with the leaders, for maybe 22 miles, but it was running 85-degree heat and not much shade, and I made it to 25 miles, and then I was done. I still don't know where I stopped or how I got to the finish line, but evidently someone picked me up and took me to the finish, but I was so disappointed. So that's why I wanted to talk about what is winning and losing, what is winning and losing the marathon. It was actually won by a fellow American named Ron Tabb, who was really, I don't know, he was telling me he was injured. I think he was goofing around. He was telling me, well, I'm taking acupuncture. I am a believer to a degree in acupuncture and everything. But it was a crushing blow to travel so far. You're doing your best, and it was the same for me in the Olympic marathon, because the Olympic Games are kind of like, You know, in football, it's the Super Bowl, but in track and field or distance, the Olympic Games, every 4 years only, you know. And so I made the team in '76 against the Olympic gold medalist, Frank Shorter. And so that, I was state of shock, you know, but unfortunately hurt my foot in between the time of the trials and going to the Olympic Games. So I didn't know I was gonna hit the wall so bad, but I hit the wall bad, you know. But I guess what I want to say sort of is that you can always make a comeback. So I got crushed in that race. I was with the leaders like halfway, and I felt okay, but then I started to just deteriorate, and I think maybe I got caught up too much in the race, and my foot had a condition where your shoes are too tight and you get pain in your forefoot, you know, and so I didn't do any speed work for like 5-6 weeks before the race. I really hit the wall. I couldn't compete. And when you're at the Olympics, if you can't compete on that day, you're certainly not going to get a medal. Only a few people win a medal, you know, out of the Olympians and all. But to be there was such an honor, you know, it was unbelievable. But I limped into the finish line, and I remember going to the stadium, and it said, "See you in Moscow in 4 years." And I thought, 4 years? You know, I don't think you can't think that far ahead. You know, we marathoners don't think that far ahead, I don't think, really, you know. And of course, then the Olympic boycott came on the scene, which I never thought was going to happen, but did happen. Because, you know, but out of the Olympic boycott came good. And I think that's what you always have to look for, you know. And I think you young people and the older people here, maybe the older people, we need it more. We need always to look for on the bright side, you know. After I failed in the Olympic Games, there was a new 5-city marathon going to happen in New York. And Fred LeBeau, the longtime New York City Marathon champion, came to a race in Massachusetts, the Falmouth Road race, a great race. Frank Shorter was there. And he had just taken the Olympic silver medal, crushed me, crushed all of us. But super nice guy, a great athlete. And but it gave me a chance to come back. And at New York, it was beautiful weather and a cool, bright, sunny day. I said, this is my chance. You know, I love the course. I love a course with hills where you can really use strategy and maneuver. And I was able to win that race. And so, I don't know. You keep moving on. You know, now I'm really enjoying running, though. I have 2 daughters. And I guess I was talking with Ian before when I saw his daughter running up there. And when you're a runner, you're such a crazed person, sort of. You want your kids to be out there, too, you know. So one of my dreams is to run with my kids. It's time to sit down. Thank you.
I don't know if someone's supposed to lead this off and introduce. You know who we are already, so we'll just turn it open to anyone to ask questions. If all you want to ask is Bill, that's fine. Jared and I will be fine. But yeah, any questions from anyone?
Gerontology Conference. I've been running for close to 40 years. What do I expect now that I'm 75? What comes physiologically at 75 to 90? My challenge. That extension. It's a 2-part question. The first is the physical. The second is the psychological. You know, you mentioned that you stopped running, and then the friends that come on, or you got back into it. I find that as the young crowd, that as the 50-year-olds leave me behind on the road on a Saturday run, I get discouraged. I think back to, I used to dust these guys in my day. But now I'm the back of the pack. How do you handle the psychology of aging and running?
Yeah, I think you look for someone your age about, you know, and I run with some friends who are younger, though, and they leave me behind sometimes, but we're all a little older. My youngest training partner, I think, is 62. So I think there's a kind of a boom going on now with a lot of new, older people. Some of them have been runners like you have. But others are new to it, and so there are these new 70-year-old athletes. Don't you think that's true, Ian and Jared? I mean, I think that is true. That's happening.
Ian always tells me he's going to live to 120, and so I'd like to hear what Ian has to say on this.
That has been my goal. I don't know why I declared that years ago, but I thought if I fall a little short, I still probably had a pretty good long life. So the quality is what matters more, though, than the age you make it to. I just think these changes in our bodies are inevitable. We can do things to diminish how quickly those changes happen, but we just got to find something to fill it with. The lady that Bill brought up downstairs about her son being a smoker, his life got completely changed by finding, well, he couldn't have given up smoking without the running. He needed to fill what was missing with something else. So I think that's maybe one of the keys, is not that we have to give everything up that we love, but if our bodies aren't allowing us to do this part, let's do it this way, or let's find another activity that'll keep us that enjoyment and connections with other people and some good physical health with it.
So you talked about like a higher. I was wondering what
I would probably say talk to a good endocrinologist and doctor about it, because that's not me. From my own observations with it, though, the impact is important. We've got to have large impacts on the body, something beyond just walking. It needs to be a bit of running or landing from jumps and so on. And then nutrition and drug therapy are the three aspects to look at: exercise, drug therapy, and nutrition. We can control our nutrition really well if we're committed to it, and we can control our activity levels, and that'll help.
You know, I was going to just say something to that too, because I broke my leg running when I was 55 years old. You know, I was on an 8-mile run. One of my old training partners and friends, rivals, a fellow named Tom Fleming, was a really good marathoner, and Jared probably know him too. And he had quit running and everything, but he was on a bike. We were doing a training run together on the island of Nantucket, and he was behind me on the bike ride, and he said, "Bill, did you know your right calf is twice as big as your left calf?" I said, "What?" You know, and then he rode his bike back to the hotel we're staying at, you know, and I continued. I was doing like an 8-mile run or something. I was about 6 miles into it, and I heard a little cracking noise, and I went down to the ground. Not hard, I wasn't running fast, but I broke my tibia. And in a nutshell, what I discovered, you know, they put me on crutches in a little hospital they have there, and I went home, and doctor didn't know why I broke my leg. I think I later kind of deduced that I was low in vitamin D. I'm ectomorphic body type, you know, small bone person and everything, you know, so that's more likely to hit you, you know. And now I take vitamin D every day, and at first I was on Fosamax or something, but there were negative side effects and everything. So I said, no, I'm just going to be a runner and run on grass more and cross-train more, you know, as you get older. I think that's a big part of it, you know. And I wonder, Jared, do you cross-train and everything, and Ian as well? I mean, cross-training is part of it, or you don't always want to do one sport, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to get a little, to maximize potential without increasing necessarily impact. Our bodies, if you look at how triathletes train compared to how marathoners train, triathletes can train 8 hours a day or more, and if I was to try running 8 hours a day, I'd fracture my leg within a week. And so there's I think there's benefits to diversifying a little bit. I also think consistency is key. It seems like often when we have these bigger injuries, these bone injuries, breaking something, you can, maybe sometimes you can't see it at the time, but looking back in hindsight, you can see changes that sort of led to that, or a perfect storm of a number of small things that created this tipping point of the bone breaks. And I think as we create approaches to training and life that are sustainable so that we can be consistent, then we reduce the risk for those things. So often, we wake up with a New Year's resolution and we're going to run a marathon and we got to get ready for it today, and we go too hard too soon, and then you're injured, so you have to back off, and you take 2 weeks low, and then you're frustrated because you had to back off, so you do 2 weeks hard again, you get injured again. And that roller coaster approach, I think, lends itself to injury too. And so I think things that we can do to maintain some sort of level of consistency sort of helps prevent that, in my experience. There's a question, maybe here and then here.
Yes, I want to hear what all three of you have to say about this. Going back to psychology, do you have anything that you do every day that helps you become more tough?
I do. Yeah, so I'm going to say two things. The first thing is recognize what you're good at. I think a lot of times it's easy, especially in a transparent, social media-driven world, to see what everybody else is so good at and quickly identify what we wish we were better at. And I think the exercise of finishing a run or a workout or an assignment or a lecture or a session, in my case, a session of parenting, and first saying, hey, I did this aspect of it really good, validates that I did something well and creates almost a cascading effect of confidence that trickles over into doing other things well. And so I've made a concerted effort at validating the things that I'm doing well. And the second thing I would say is Ryan Hall wrote a book, very good marathoner. He titled it Run the Mile You're In. And I felt like that has been a helpful psychological principle to keep me in the present and to not psych myself out by trying to bite off more than I can chew. But if I can validate the positive things that I'm doing moment by moment, and then also live moment by moment, then you hit a few less walls.
What do you do psychologically to be ready?
That's, were you kind of asking about going to races or just in life in general and finding what you might be looking for?
Both, but I was asking about what do you do anything every day? Kind of habit.
I think part of it is your diet and where you might want to run and your running partners, and I run with Karen, my partner, and everything. We make our plans for when we're going to run and everything. And but I think competition is a different world. When you get into racing, it's a different world. But also, in terms of getting injured and that sort of thing, I think sometimes, like when I broke my leg, I come to think of it, was going through a really stressful period in my life. So we're a human being. So stress of different kinds affects us. There's physical and then there's psychological, I guess, and things like that. And we learn kind of as we go. I mean, don't you think, Ian? I mean,
For sure.
I think there's a lot of that. We're going to make our tries and things, and sometimes we find what we're not good at, and then we move to what we can maybe works better for us.
Well, if I can jump in with Bill Rogers too. So Bill and I do a race, at the Bellin Run in Green Bay that we've done a number of years in a row, and it's a 10K race out in Green Bay, and I've had a lot of fun interacting with Bill and other runners there. And one thing that I was surprised to find my first time there, it was my first time there as meeting Bill Rogers and other runners that they bring in that I was excited to meet. And I was so taken aback by the reality of how committed and serious Bill Rogers takes getting on that start line in Green Bay. I mean, I projected a little that if I'm going to retire someday and hopefully I'm still running and man, hopefully I'm still able to run by the time I'm, 65, 70 years old and just be there. And I was, hoping that I could still be having fun at that age. Bill's on the start line ready to run his best, run the best that it's not the same 10K you could have run decades ago, but he's going to run his best. And I was so impressed by that. And I think that's a mentality, right? That's a daily mentality to say, I'm going to run the best that I have today. And it really impressed me when I met you the first time.
The other tricky thing is, when I was new runner coming up and everything, there was no money in the sport. But when the sport went professional in 1981, everything changed. And those of us we have both been able to make a living in the sport too. So that's kind of an edge that we have on most runners. Very tricky thing to make a living in the sport. And sometimes it's taken away from you, and it's a very hard thing. And so I think but maybe it's better not to be in that situation because of the pressure that's there, I mean, Jared, you run for Saucony. I ran for ASICS, some different shoe companies, and the shoe companies can be mean. They can say, oh, you're over the hill, and suddenly you don't have an agreement, and there's your lifetime, your income. So it's like you're on a knife's edge sometimes, in the sport. So now I think when you get older, though, it's more like you're taking care of your health, and it's a habit. So I think this guy's going to keep going, and we're all going to keep going.
The free shoes are nice, though.
The free shoes are very good.
Yeah.
I've got to talk to him about his shoes. I am actually going to talk to him about his shoes. Because and your shoes are so important. And because if you don't have the right shoes, my partner Karen, when she was a new runner, didn't know anything about running. Got shoes too small. Next thing you know, she's going in to get cortisone shots in her foot. Do you know what I'm saying to you? So you really want to go to the shoe stores, and I think there's a shoe store right nearby here.
Yeah, there's a good
Yes.
See
Yes.
that man right
But
there.
the ultra runners,
University Avenue.
University Avenue. So this is the place to go. You want to go where you're going to get what's right for you, because everyone's foot is different and body type, and get the shoe that works for you. And Karen, she struggled for years. Her foot would have nerve pain. And she ran, and it finally died off. And but so important. In other sports, it's race car drivers, they have their car, and their reflexes. For us, it's our shoes and the information you get from your training partners and the people at the stores. That's where you get your info, don't you think?
Sure.
Did you go to the store when you were younger or no?
Many times.
Yeah.
Many times. Yeah. The runner's corner will take care of you.
I think the psychology of running is a overlooked aspect. I think it's enormous. But my daily part, I take a physical approach to what gets me in the mental state. I look at, actually it's the night before, what do I need to do tomorrow to be ready for the next day or to be ready for April 18th? So last night I went to bed. My legs are kind of beat up. Tomorrow is a recovery day of running. I'm going to focus on this pace. And that kind of thinking gets my psychology in the right state to be ready to accomplish whatever's needed, and also gets me excited about it. So prepare physically, and then my optimistic attitude and psychologies kind of flow with that.
I think it's you're trying to build yourself up mentally. Because when you're in the start line, and we all go through the same thing, and how tricky competition is. And sometimes, I don't know, I think I've had about 20 terrible marathons. Don't have as many as those, but I did learn from them. And so the night before, you're trying to eat your food that works for you. For me, it was macaroni and cheese. Jared, did you have a certain meal? And Ian? And I wonder what, everyone's a little different, but that was something that worked for me in high school. I remember my mom making me macaroni and cheese. So it was a secret weapon, and it really does work. It's carbohydrates, it's delicious. You can eat 2 plates of it. You're not going to get sick. It's not a food that's too unusual. I mean, sometimes my good friend Amy Burfitt went to the Olympic trials in '68, but he was a little too overzealous and over-carbo-loaded. And had to stop, porta-johns on the way. So if you take the middle cautious path, you're always going to do better, you know? So I think that works best, you know? And I think that's what you did, Jared. And I think that's your personality a little bit. I didn't have the personality. I got beat up a lot. But you're kind of a very calm person. And I was kind of a more very nervous person. So I think our personalities play a role. I'm not sure. I don't know.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to ask you a question, Ian. I think you were inadequately introduced in terms of performances in marathon over the years.
Look who I'm sitting with.
I know, but you're closest to me in age, and I want you to kind of summarize, because I don't know the numbers. I'm not trying to just have you tell me something I know. I want you to summarize kind of your marathon kind of bests across the last 10 years and how that's impacting you and motivations right now, and you need to share with us your current age process. Give us a little bit rundown. Because I think you're accomplishing some remarkable things at this stage of life, and you are running Boston.
That's on the schedule. We have to say it that way because we never know what comes along the way, but that's the plan. 15 years ago, I had no plans of doing a marathon. 10 years, I was in it. But 37 years old is when I did my first, because I was a short distance runner. And the first one I finished, I got 9th in St. George and 2:22:03, I think. Might have been 2:23:02. It's the same thing, really. And I got my massage, and the guy said, "How'd it go?" I said, "I got 9th. Oh, how many have you done? First one." And he said, "Well, what are you doing next?" I'm going back to some 800-meter training. I did what I wanted to see. Could I finish one? And a year later, I thought, maybe I made those little mistakes in it. I'll try again. And so at 39, I went back, and that year I won, about a minute faster. And then at 43 is when I had my best. That was 2:20:53. So, and now last one was 7 minutes slower than that, and I enjoyed it. Actually, I would say more than the year I won, because of going through the trials of plantar fascia surgery and so on, and getting back and, okay, I can still do this, and it was fun. So, yeah.
And last year's were about 2:27.
Yeah.
At age what?
50. Yeah, I'll be 51 in May. Yeah. And who knows, in 10 years, you ask me that again, and I might be happy with the times, I might not be, but I think I'll still be enjoying it, whatever it is.
Yeah, shoot.
All right, I got a question. Hypothetically, supposing that your has you at a certain level, but you're not hitting the time on that shot. What would you say? Obviously, running plays a role, right? Talk to me about what you would do to getting most out of your cardiovascular.
You go to Runner's Corner and get faster shoes.
Saucony?
I think there's two, the VO2 is one system, right? You saw in that chart that, it charted me at a 3:54 mile or something like that, which I'm not capable of based on lactate max, based on probably fast twitch apportionment of muscle fibers. There's a few things, and I could maybe change some of those, right, if I trained for those, but I think VO2 max is one part of the system, and I consider VO2 max almost a ceiling. So you raise your VO2 max, it raises your ceiling of potential, especially as it relates to a marathon, an event that's indirectly tied to what your VO2 max is, but not as directly tied as maybe a 2-mile race or something like that, right? And so after your VO2 max is high enough that you are, your VO2 max is up here and you're running marathons here, well, it's time to work on some of those other systems, and that's your That's your threshold system. So those are your long, hard runs that aren't at an interval-ish pace. I might say, from a coaching standpoint, you have what your body's going to benefit from in terms of doing hard mile repeats or hard 800-meter repeats. Now you need to focus on the long runs or on your volume or on your ability to buffer that lactate and things like that. And so, there's a few systems that you train, and at that point it just says, to me, it says, well, let's train these other systems as well.
Are you sure you did stats for your You sounded like you were one of Dr. Nelson's students.
Are there any exercise physiologist professors here? Because I'd feel a lot more comfortable if there aren't.
How do you do? That was good. Some of you might know the name Brian Lindsay. He was our school record holder in the 1500 for a while. He had a really low VO2 max. And Brian, I was the one that tested him, and he was discouraged by it. And I said, Brian, this means that something in your body is just totally off the charts. If you can run a 357 in college, I think was his best mile. So I like focus on the things that you have the strengths at in running. The VO2 max, it is what it is, and it may be able to improve a little bit, but Brian's training enhanced his highest qualities and capacities. So your number is a predictor, but it's not the only predictor. And what I've observed is if you find out where you are way above everyone else, then that's the thing to really focus the training towards, and seems like the best improvements come.
Well, Ian, I think Frank Shorter didn't have the highest VO2 max in one of these big studies that was done back in the 70s down at Ken Cooper's lab down in Texas, but he had great running economy. And I don't know if, and that's the whole running form issue, and I think that's where what you have both talked about, the cross-training thing, maybe using some weights, and Frank always did that too. But maybe VO2 max doesn't count as much in the longer distances. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, the ability to run close to it for a long time matters more than what it is for the long distance.
You're running good.
We missed your question earlier. Did you have something still? Have we all been there? I'll try to just do a brief answer and let these guys go too. I've only had that once, and it's because I trusted my coach. This is the pace he thought I could handle. First time I thought, I don't think I can, but I just decided I'm believing him anyway and went for it, and I didn't have that. The time it happened, it was a dehydration nutritional issue. So there, it was, I'm just determined to finish. I'm going to do it anyway, but it was slow. But prepare well and choose the right pace avoids it.
And also learning the course you're going to run. Boston, for example, is a very tricky course, and so is New York City. Chicago is very flat. You can plan. It's easier in many ways. My partner Karen, she ran Boston one time. We didn't get together for dinner that night. She didn't eat her pasta. She ran the race basically on 0 carbohydrates. You can't do that. We're not machines. We're human. We have to eat our food. And so she hit the wall. She made it. She's very tough mentally. She has just got this ability to, I don't have that. When I hit the wall and I go over to the side of the road and I lie down. And sometimes you have to do that. And once I dropped out at Boston, I was really training. I trained hard. I was 50 years old. I was trying for the American record over age 50, but it was a hot day, and I got nailed. But after I got up and I got in, they got this vehicle that picks you up. It's great. Modern marathoning is great. You don't have to walk home. They got the vehicle, the pickup truck, and it comes by and it picks you up and it takes you to the finish. So I got in the finish, and there's Joe and Zhao, one of my friends. He's a Kenyan guy. He's very good. We were pretty even. I said, Joe, it's great to see you. Because it's kind of like misery loves company a little bit, you know, and you're commiserating and finding out, why did I get beat up, you know?
Well, I think if you can unlock the question of how to not hit a wall or how to overcome the wall, you unlock the secret to not only marathoning but to life. I think life is a series of walls. And when I think of the wall in a marathon, I think of this moment in the race where there's enough stuff. Maybe you haven't prepared well. Maybe you haven't fueled well. There's enough things that have happened that you're tired. But then the wall happens when your mind says, "Oh no, there's 6 miles left in this race." If the race finished, if the marathon finished at mile 21, I don't think there'd be a lot of people hitting the wall at mile 20, right? But the reality is, at 20, when you think, "Oh no," and you're thinking ahead, then you sort of lose it. And so to me, a key to getting through the wall is figuring out how to get your mind back to the present, how to refocus on right now, because if the race finished in 1 mile, you'd be fine. And it becomes kind of a sick trick to do it to yourself over and over and over again for 8 more miles in a marathon, right? But that idea of, can I get my mind back to the present and run the mile that I'm in, and then let the rest of those come, seems to be a good way to get through the wall.
Because sometimes you're in a race and someone comes up with you and you think you should be able to do a certain pace, and suddenly people start passing you or something, and suddenly you're going beyond what you should do. Something that is a good strategy is drafting someone. When you'll see all the professional runners, most of the pros they're lying low in the beginning, and they stay back. And runners who may not know any better, like me, in my early days, I didn't know what I was doing some, and run too fast, they just let you go because you're like a sitting duck, and they can sit behind you and conserve energy. So everything is conserving energy, I think Jared was saying, mentally and physically. But there are some people that will never quit, and I'm always amazed by those people. I sort of admire them, but I'm also kind of like, I don't know if that's a good thing. Because some of them, I know one guy, he always ended up in the hospital. I mean, he was just like that. I don't think that's a good strategy. Take care of your health, but have fun on the way.
Well, thank you very much. This has been very informative for all of us. I've always thought the marathon wouldn't be so bad if it wasn't for the last 20 miles. But it was in September, just real briefly, in September, our Gerontology Committee, we threw your name out, Bill, as somebody that could come, and everybody was excited about that. So we got approval from the administration, and that took a few weeks. And then I sent you an email, and I was praying the whole time that you'd respond. And if 2 or 3 days went by, no word, and so I prayed a little harder, and you responded. And it was really exciting that you were willing to come. And then I went down and talked with Ian, and thought you two would be such a great team. And do you remember when I said, could you also bring Jared along?
I said, oh yeah, he'll do it.
Yeah, that's what he said. And so we're so happy that you've joined us, and yeah, join me in thanking these guys for being here.